Dozalapa Tashidele. Lasso Fiapulla. Namaste everybody. Welcome back to our channel, Jhigu Economy, the only place where we take terrifyingly dense government economic data and translate it into plain, everyday human language. A couple of months ago, we joked about Asare Bikash, that time of the year when roads suddenly get dug up, construction sites become busy overnight, and everyone starts asking, why does everything happen only in Asar? Now that the fiscal year 2025-26 is officially over, I wanted to see whether that joke is still true. Has the government actually become better at spending development money throughout the year? Or are we still doing everything at the last minute? So, I pulled the final Treasury data, and what I found wasn't exactly what I expected. The first number isn't great. For fiscal year 2025-26, the government managed to spend only 46.8% of the development budget it had originally planned. Now, development budget simply means money for things like roads, bridges, schools, irrigation projects, and other public infrastructure. So, spending less than half of that budget isn't ideal. In fact, it's only slightly better than the 46.4% recorded during the COVID lockdown year of fiscal year 2019-20. That makes fiscal year 2025-26 the second lowest capital spending execution in decades. Honestly, when I first saw that number, I thought that this was going to be another story about poor budget execution. But then I looked at when the money was actually spent, and that's when things become interesting. During the first 25 days of Asar 2083, the government released 48.9 billion rupees for development projects. Then came the final year of the fiscal year. Even though regular payments are supposed to stop during those last 7 days, another 9.3 billion rupees was still released. By the time fiscal year 2025-26 ended, total development spending had reached 190.8 billion rupees. At first, those numbers don't sound unusual, but watch what happens when we put them together. Nearly 26% of the entire year's development spending happened during just the first 25 days of Asar. Another 5% happened during the final 7 days. In other words, almost one out of every three rupees spent on development during the whole year was released in just 1 month. Suddenly, the phrase Asare Bikash doesn't sound like a joke anymore. It shows up right there in the data. At this point, I had another question. Wasn't there supposed to be a rule to stop this? There is. Since February 1, 2021, government offices have been required to stop making regular payments 7 days before the fiscal year ends. The idea was pretty simple. If you remove the option of spending everything at the very end, offices should start planning earlier. At least that was the hope. But then I noticed something. The regulation also includes an exception. If an office can show that a payment is urgently needed and submits the required documents, the Treasury can still release the money. So the final week isn't completely closed. There's still a small door left open. That made me curious. If the rule still allows some payments, has it actually changed anything? So I went back through almost 10 years of Treasury data. And I have to say, the answer surprised me. Let's start with the good news. Before this regulation, the government sometimes spent between 3% and 13% of the entire year's development budget on the very last day of the fiscal year. Just think about that. One day. Today, that number is zero. So, on that point, the rule has clearly worked. But the last day isn't the whole story. The final 7 days are much more important. Before the regulation, that final week usually accounted for 22 to 32% of the entire year's development spending. When the rule was first introduced, I expected that number to drop immediately. It didn't. The first few years were still 17%, then 19%. Government offices were still relying heavily on the emergency exception. Only gradually did things start changing. Year after year, the final week spending became smaller, and by fiscal year 2025-26, it had fallen to just 5%. That's actually a big improvement, but it also tells us something important. Changing a regulation is relatively easy. Changing the way an entire government system works takes much longer. Even in fiscal year 2025-26, 9.3 billion rupees still passed through during a period that was supposed to be mostly closed. So the habit hasn't disappeared. It's just become smaller. So has Nepal finally fixed Asare Bikash? I'd say not completely. The data clearly shows that the government has made real progress in reducing the last minute spending rush during the final week of the fiscal year. That's good news. But the bigger challenge is still there. Nearly one out of every three development rupees in fiscal year 2025-26 was still released during Asar. So instead of asking, why is everything happening in the last week? Maybe the better question is, why is so much still happening only in the last month? That feels like the next challenge Nepal has to solve. But what do you think? Do these numbers make you optimistic that the system is finally improving? Or do they show that we're still leaving too much work until the very end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Jhigu Economy. Super for your time, and I'll see you next time. Bye.